Hi, I'm Joe Roeder from Red's Fly Shop. We're going to talk about fishing strategies for cold water conditions today. These are do-it-yourself strategies for anglers that want to extend their season and have more success in cold water. Like and subscribe the video and follow our channel if you want more do-it-yourself content. That's what this video is all about. It's about getting you out on foot, being successful when most anglers are at home on the couch. The water temperatures that we're talking about are really going to be in the low 40s to mid 30s. Once the water hits about 45 degrees, you'll see pretty aggressive trout behavior most of the time. Once it gets below there, those fish are under a period of low metabolism. They're going to be a little bit harder to dig out of there unless you have some very particular strategies working in your favor. Primarily swinging streamers. That's a really enjoyable way on foot to cover a lot of water. Have a great time doing it, and it's a simple gear set and it's effective if you can swing that fly low and slow. So follow along with me, jump in the river. We're gonna get you schooled up on how to fish in cold water. I love streamer fishing when the water is cold because it's a really peaceful way to fish. I primarily swing streamers in the wintertime where I can drop a nice cast in there, especially if you enjoy casting a long ways at times without strike indicators or two nymphs on the end of the line. And then what's cool about streamer fishing is when I do sweep that bait fish across the river, I actually get to feel that grab, and I'm directly connected with all the power that that fish has quite instantly. The reason that the streamer can be really effective this time of year, why it's a good go-to, is there's not a lot of insect hatches or bugs happening. So the trout don't have access to these big hatches like they do in the spring and the summer. There's no grasshoppers, there's no caddis, there's no mayflies or any of that stuff. What there are going to be forage fish like sculpin and crayfish and other minnows and other prey fish that are out there cruising around. The other cool thing about it is in the winter, especially in a rainbow trout fishery like we have here, is the rainbows in the wintertime are generally, or at least the mature rainbows, are pre-spawn. They're going to spawn in March. And in January, February, and early March, those bigger trout are pretty aggressive. And we can catch, on average, a much more mature trout this time of year if we're swinging streamers. So that's kind of an upside, is you've got that big fish factor in there as well. So that's one of the many things I love about streamer fishing, but I think the core of it is really about that grab. It is so much fun. So when it comes to streamer fishing, and we're really just going to talk about swinging, that to me is a great wintertime strategy versus casting out into like a big back eddy or something and stripping a streamer in. I like to let the power of the river move my fly in a big swath across there. And I think the first thing I want to tell you is finding a good piece of swinging water where I'm casting out into a faster current and letting that fly slowly curl around into this slower water that's below me. So I'm looking for these decelerating currents where it's slower on my half of the river. I don't want to try to cast over fast water into slow water. I think that's a really important thing to know. And the swing itself is very, very peaceful. It's a classic form of fishing. Don't worry about the casting. There's lots of different ways to cast this fly here. I'll talk a little bit about my gear towards the end. But your basic strategy is pretty simple. It's very efficient. You can see that I can get my cast back out there really quick. But if you were to build a blueprint for this type of fishing, it's going to be cast at roughly 90 degrees, throw a mend to buy it a little time for your sink tip to get down, and then that fly is going to be sinking, and then it's going to slowly swim across the river and rise up. And if you do it right, it actually rises up onto the shallow ledge and stays somewhat near the bottom for the duration of the swing. So that's going to be my blueprint, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through it here. And like I said, don't worry about the cast. However you get the cast out there is up to you. But I'm going to cast 90 degrees, and I've just got to cast, mend, and I could even step while it's sinking a little bit, and then I've got my swing. And I can just hold dead steady. We call that dead sticking. And I can just see all those ripples moving the line, and that's going to be undulating the tail of my bait fish pattern or my streamer And it's just gonna work its way all the way across just like that. My preference is to generally dead stick if the fish are gonna respond to it. I just let the current kind of move the fly and undulate those soft materials. It's a well-tied fly. I've got to give it an opportunity to do its job. The nice thing about dead sticking is you can feel every little take, and it is just a good jolt when that fish grabs. So after you catch a few fish and you really master the cast, mend, swing, kind of the standard presentation, there's going to be some other things that we want to do. And the first one I want to talk about is just doing some pop jigs. And that's going to provide a little bit of action to my fly. So I've got my fly set up in the riffle and it's sinking, sinking, sinking. And as it sets up and comes tight, once I feel it come tight, I'm going to do some little pop jigs, vertical action with the rod. And it's really important that that's straight up and down. And what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to pop a little hump of slack into the line. So I'm going to pop, 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 pop on a heartbeat rhythm. Okay, so I want it to be very consistent coming across. And if the current's faster, or your pulse I feel like is faster, and I'm gonna go doo, 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 doo. If it's faster water, my fly can recover between pops a little bit quicker. If it's slower water, it's gonna take longer for my line to get tight again, and so my popping cadence is gonna be slower. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna fire it back out in the riffle. I cast, I mend, it's setting up. I'm gonna feel for the line to come tight. Okay, my line's tight. And now I'm going to add action to that. And that's going to be that minnow pulsing and pumping across. Just like that. Pop, 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 pop. Now what I've got below me here is I've got this nice big deep hole. And so I can actually pop a little bit to my left, just a little bit, and try to draw that fly over into that slack water. Okay, that was good. And I don't need to cast a long ways here. This is a short swing. So I'm just cast, mend, sink, sink, sink. Now I'm swinging, now I'm swinging. All right, I'm gonna introduce a pop jig again. Pop, 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 pop. And I'm gonna slightly guide it over into this slack water here. And then what I can do, I'm gonna let that keep sinking. It's nice deep water right below me here. I'm just gonna slowly strip this fly back up rather than kill that presentation. Okay, nothing there. Let's again fire it back out. Here I go. Cast, mend, sinking, sinking. And I'm going to slide that fly right off that ledge. The deep water is down below me here on this side. So the very end of my swing is really the juice box right in here. Oh boy, I know those trout are right there. Okay, that's the pop jig. No love in that spot. This water is pretty cold, and I'm just looking for one big hungry trout, but I didn't find him here in this spot. Try the next one. Now I want to talk about the fly presentation three-dimensionally. So that's like the lifting or the scoop is what I like to call it. Imagine if you're a trout sitting in this slot right here, and a critter comes out of the substrate, like out of the rocks, and swims up out of the little boulders, and you're the first trout there to see this sculpin or this crayfish or this creature come up right in front of you, and you're the first one there. You're the first one on scene. You're probably gonna grab that. And that creature that we're imitating, we really are lifting it from the bottom up. And when we can do that with our swinging presentation, we can be really deadly. So what I have here is I have this really narrow slot. And I'm gonna put my fly in here, and I'm gonna sink it down, and I'm gonna be very conscientious about giving it a couple little bends, and I'll even creep down a little bit, and I'm still sinking, I'm still sinking, I'm still sinking. Now, my most suspicious area of this slot is right there, and I'm gonna hold my rod out just a little bit, and I'm gonna hold it really steady because I want my fly to lift up, and I want it to rise right in front of that most suspicious spot. Now, I didn't get a grab right there as it lifted, so I'm gonna finish with some pop jigs and let it come around just below me like that. Okay, same thing. I'm gonna cast out, and I'm sinking, sinking, sinking right here. And I've measured my cast very carefully so that I can get it to lift right there. I got my fly down near the bottom. There's a nice fish. Right like that. There we go. and it's a stick. Dude, that thing was planing. it was planing just like a dang fish. Oh my God. One right there, bottom. Okay, so we're gonna use this as an example. Okay, there's another technique, and it honestly is a technique, but we're gonna use this example, this snag, it's called finding the bottom. And I cast it a little bit below 90 degrees and I still managed to snag up. And you don't want to forget the casting angle that you had, because if you are hitting bottom, you need to lower your angle a few degrees. So what I'll do is assuming I get my fly back here, I wish I had a great trick for getting a fly back on that angle, but fortunately I did. But what I want to do now is I found the bottom, I know where the threshold is. If I go any further upstream, I'm just going to continue to snag every time. I need to move down about 5 degrees. So I'm going to cast off my right shoulder this time. I'm going to cast down 5 degrees, probably not give it quite as big of a bend, and I'm going to stay off of the bottom. So I found the bottom right there, and now I'm going to stay off the bottom down here, and I'm going to let that fly just continue to lift, 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 lift as it comes up towards this ledge that I'm standing on. It's a little deeper out there like that. But finding the bottom is a good technique when you're not getting a grab and you're working down. Sometimes even if I'm going 90 degrees and I feel like there's fish there, I'll continue to work 5 degrees up until I make contact in my swing with the bottom, and then I know when to back off. So finding the bottom or getting a snag once in a while, use that information to help dictate where you're going to cast your fly on the next couple of presentations. All right, so in this run here, this is much deeper, much swifter. It's just this big rolling chop, and I've got this area below me here that's kind of my target area, but I'm having trouble feeling like I'm getting my fly deep enough. And one thing you can do is I can cast, slightly above 90 degrees, but when I put this mend into it, I'm gonna put a good sized mend into it. As it's dead drifting, I'm gonna take 3 giant steps down and really extend the sinking time that my fly has before it begins to gain tension and engage the swing here. And that's just called a step down. So if I'm gonna step it down, I'm gonna put the fly in as it's sinking, not as it's swinging. That's really important to know. You do not wanna move once that fly, once you're tight to the fly. So I'm gonna do it again. This bite has been absolutely dead today. Not a single grab thus far. These fish are being very stingy and very lockjawed, so I'm really trying to get that fly right down on the floor and bring it off the rocks. And then the other thing I can do is I'm going to take a little bit more line off my reel, and I'm going to go ahead and make a little longer cast, put a big back mend on it, and gain a little bit more slack. So now I've got even more dead drift, and I'm going to step it down about 4 times. Now I feel it coming tight right there, and I can just feel that pull and that tension is heavier this time, meaning I'm a little lower in the water column. I'm going to go ahead and continue jigging it out and letting it turn the corner here, just like that, just hoping and longing for that grab on the hang down right here as it finishes. But yes, stepping that fly down, giving it a little additional sink time in some of these bigger, deeper troughs can be a really good way to get down lower in the column. So when you are swinging, one nice thing and an enjoyable part of this kind of fishing is we're going to swing with the line tight to our reel. I'm not going to have a lot of sloppy, loose line for feeding or mending or anything. I'm just right here connected to my reel. When the fish picks the fly up, I'm going to feel some resistance, or I'm going to physically feel that fish grab. And my hook set should be on the downstream side like this right here. So I'm going to come back against that fish downstream, and I'm going to put a good bend in that rod, just like that right there. If I hook set nice and low to the side, there's a lot of things that happen. One, I can utilize any bow in the line to maintain a lot of tension. If I pick up like this, I'm probably going to have my rod way back here in a non-strategic position because my line has some curve to it, and I don't want to remove that curve. I want to preserve that curve and use it just like this, setting the hook low and downstream to the side right there. The other thing about setting the hook is I'll generally run the line right through my finger like this right there to add additional drag for the hook set. So the line has quite a bit of stretch. I'm not too worried about breaking the fish off. I'm gonna set with the line in my hand right there because the bow in the line tends to add a lot of additional drag. So much of my hook set isn't actually getting to the trout. So I set right there, I've got the line in my hand. If the fish turns downstream and it's a large fish and begins to take line, I can then drop my fingers off of the line right there and let that fish take off and head downstream like that. Once I've established that fight, oftentimes I can just keep the fish right immediately on the reel, just like this right there, adding maybe a little bit of additional drag by running it over my fingers if I need to, but I can actually physically reel the fish like that and get them on the reel, eliminating all that slop and slack and that awkwardness that comes with having a lot of extra lines when you're nymph fishing or even dry fly fishing or using another strategy. So let's talk about tackle setups for this type of fishing. Now, your rod should be a minimum of a 5-weight, preferably a 6-weight, something pretty fast action. Fast action rods just recover a lot better for casting sink tips and weighted flies. So I happen to be fishing a 9-foot 5-weight today. A 6-weight's probably a little bit better. Now, when it comes to the line system, you could see that I was doing somewhat of a single spay cast. I have a shooting head line. It's a little Skagit line, and that's fun to fish. If you're familiar with that tackle, it's a great option because you don't have back cast and you can make a really quick shot back out into the water. It's not absolutely essential for being good at swinging streamers. I swing streamers a lot on just a traditional sink tip line. This happens to be a Scientific Angler's Trout Express, and I really like this line for casting from a boat. So it's maybe a little bit more versatile for lakes or casting from a boat, and you can also swing. The disadvantage is you are going to have a lot of back casts, so you're going to need a little bit of room to do that. But I keep a spool like that available all the time as well. This line with the shooting head happens to be an OPST, Olympic Peninsula Skagit Tactics, shooting head line. It's a short little head, and then loop to loop on the end of that, I have a sinking poly leader that sinks at 7 inches per second. And so I can change those. They're modular, so I can put on a faster sinking or a slower sinking depending on if I'm snagging bottom too much or maybe I'm not getting deep enough. I can alter that tip right there. Now, whether I'm using the sinking line that I showed you or this Skagit head system, I'm gonna need some tippet on the end of that. So I don't use a traditional tapered leader. I'm really just using anywhere from 3 to 5 feet of fluorocarbon tippet on the end. The sink tip line is really designed to swing and steer the streamer around the river, and the further the fly gets from the sink tip, I actually have a little less control of it. So you can run a pretty short leader, minimum of 3 feet, maximum of 5. Anywhere from 3x tippet on the light end up to 0x tippet on the heavy end is appropriate. If you're just getting started in this, be thinking about 1 or 2x tippet. With that strong a tippet, you don't lose a lot of flies, you don't get a lot of tangles or wind knots in it. Now, when it comes to tying your fly on, it's best if you refer to another video on the instructions on how to do this, but a loop knot will give your fly a lot more articulation like that right there. So that's my basic tackle setup. We'll talk about fly selection next, and I'll give you a few suggestions on what flies would be both effective and versatile for you. Now, when it comes to swinging streamers, you want to have a fly that you start with that's relatively small. This is a wounded sculpin. It's a little number 8 with just a tiny cone head. And I say start with a small fly because it doesn't have as much disruption to the piece when you throw it into a pool. If you start out with the biggest streamer in the box, you've pretty much told all the trout you're there. So if I'm going to fish a run, I want to start with a smaller fly, something like a wounded sculpin or a soccer mom like this right here. And what I would like to do if I'm wade fishing is I'll fish a run once with a smaller streamer like that. They cast better. They don't disrupt the kind of the force, if you will, in a pool. And then I'll come back through with something larger. This is called the meat sweats right there. And the interesting thing about this fly is it's weighted in the belly, and the belly is white like a sculpin. And so that fly will ride hook up. And so when I'm ready to get down and dirty on them and bump the bottom a little bit, or find the bottom, so to speak, like I described earlier in the video, I have this jig style hook, so when I pop twitch it or anything, it'll pull it up off the bottom. and it tends to stay pretty snag free because of that design. But the meat sweats would be an example of a larger streamer that I would use after maybe I've made a pass through the run with that. Other good options are going to be a small Sculpzilla. The Sculpzilla is a real classic pattern. We probably sold 100,000 of these at Reds over the years. That one's pretty beat up. It's probably got a few tooth marks in it, but the small Sculpzilla is articulated, and I don't know, I don't have a strong opinion on whether a fly should be articulated with the hook and the tail or not, but this one does have an articulated hook. But the feature that I do like about the articulated flies is the hooks are smaller, which seem to penetrate better and are easier on the trout as well. So you can have a pretty good sized streamer like this Sculpzilla right here, but still have a small hook. So I think that that's a really nice element to the articulated flies. Anything with marabou or rabbit that has a lot of undulation and flex is going to be a pretty good choice for swinging a fly on a sink tip line in the cold water.